started with a splash. Literally. I woke up one morning to the sound of water gushing. Not from my faucet, but from a massive hole dug right into my backyard. At first, I thought it was some kind of prank. Maybe my neighbor's kids were messing around. But as I stumbled outside in my pajamas, rubbing sleep out of my eyes, what I saw froze me in place. Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe if you want more Karen and HOA stories. Please listen to the whole story and give me a comment about your feelings. Thanks everyone for watching. A team of workers in neon vests stood over a giant pit filled with water. And there, at the center of it all, was a sign that read, Oakwood Heights HOA Fish Farm Project. My name is Sarah Carter, and this wasn't just any ordinary land dispute. No, this was personal. You see, I'm not your average homeowner. I've spent years working in environmental law, so when someone messes with my property, they better be ready for a fight. Little did the HOA know, they had just picked the wrong person to cross. The fish farm project seemed harmless enough on paper. A way to bring fresh seafood closer to the community, reduce carbon footprints, and give Oakwood Heights another bragging point. But here's the kicker. They didn't own the land they were digging up. That land? Mine. All 20 acres of rugged terrain, inherited from my grandfather, who used to joke about turning it into a wildlife sanctuary. Instead, it became an illegal construction site overnight. I walked up to the foreman, a burly guy named Jake, who barely glanced up from his clipboard. What exactly are you doing here? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He smirked, pointing to the sign. Building a fish farm for the HOA, he replied casually, like it was no big deal. My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay calm. Yelling wouldn't solve anything, not yet. Anyway, that evening, I sat down at my kitchen table surrounded by documents. Deeds, surveys, and legal papers. As a lawyer, I knew exactly how to handle situations like this. The HOA might have thought they could strong-arm me, but they hadn't counted on two things. First, that I'd catch them red-handed, and second, that I'd hit back harder than they ever imagined. What followed was a game of chess where every move mattered. And let me tell you, I wasn't about to lose. But before we dive deeper into the battle, let me set the scene. Oakwood Heights isn't just any neighborhood. It's the kind of place where people take pride in their perfectly manicured lawns and matching mailboxes. It's also home to one of the most notorious HOAs in the country, known for its strict rules and zero tolerance for dissent. So when they decided to expand their influence onto my property without permission, it wasn't surprising. They probably figured I'd roll over and accept their demands. They couldn't have been more wrong. As days turned into weeks, the fish farm grew bigger, complete with tanks, filtration systems, and even little wooden signs labeling each species of fish. Meanwhile, I gathered evidence, documenting every step of their intrusion. Every photo, every note, every conversation recorded would become ammunition in my war against the HOA. But little did they know, I held a secret weapon. One that would turn the tables completely. And now, the real story begins. I knew I had to act fast. The HOA wasn't going to stop on their own, and the longer they stayed on my land, the harder it would be for me to prove my case. So, I called an old friend of mine, Mark, a property lawyer who specialized in boundary disputes. He listened carefully as I explained everything that had happened. Sarah, he said with a chuckle, you've got them right where you want them. The next day, I started gathering evidence. Every photo, every note, every conversation I'd recorded became part of my arsenal. I even went back to the county records office to pull out the original deeds for my property. There was no way the HOA could argue against those documents. They were ironclad proof that this land belonged to me. But I didn't stop there. I also looked into the HOA's recent projects. Turns out they weren't exactly following all the rules. A few months earlier, they'd bulldozed through another neighbor's yard without permission, offering a quick payout instead of dealing with legal trouble. That same family told me they regretted taking the money because it only encouraged the HOA to keep pushing boundaries. Meanwhile, the fish farm kept growing. They installed tanks, pumps, and even little wooden signs labeling each species of fish. It looked like a thriving business already. But none of it mattered if they didn't have the legal right to operate on my land. And let me tell you, Watching them build something so elaborate while knowing I could tear it apart at any moment gave me a strange kind of satisfaction. One evening, as I sat poring over paperwork, I noticed something unusual in the HOA's plans. They mentioned using water from an underground aquifer that ran beneath my property. Now, here's the thing about aquifers: they're protected by strict water rights laws. And guess what? My grandfather, being the smart man he was, had secured senior water rights for our land decades ago. This meant anyone tapping into that aquifer needed my explicit permission, and they certainly hadn't asked. At first, I thought about confronting the HOA directly, but then I remembered Ethan's story. You know, the guy who turned off the HOA's water supply when they built a pipeline on his land? His calm approach reminded me that sometimes the best revenge is served cold. Instead of storming into their offices demanding answers, I decided to play along, for now. To make things more interesting, I reached out to a local environmental group. They were thrilled to hear about the HOA's unauthorized use of natural resources and offered to help document the situation. Together, we set up cameras around the perimeter of my property, capturing every detail of the construction process. If the HOA tried to deny anything later, these videos would be my ace in the hole. But just as I thought I had everything under control, a twist came my way. One morning, I found a letter slipped under my door. It was from the HOA, threatening legal action unless I allowed them to continue building. First, I laughed it off. How dare they threaten me when they were the ones breaking the law? But then I read the fine print. It mentioned a clause in the neighborhood covenants that supposedly granted the HOA access to adjacent properties for community improvement projects. Now, I knew this clause couldn't apply to me because I wasn't technically part of their HOA. Still, it made me nervous. What if they found some loophole or hired expensive lawyers to drag this out? I called Mark again, and he reassured me. "Don't worry, Sarah," he said. "We'll crush that clause in court. Trust me." And trust him, I did. Because deep down, I knew one thing for sure. The HOA had picked the wrong person to mess with. And soon, they'd learn that the hard way. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. If the HOA thought they could bulldoze their way onto my land and turn it into some kind of fish farm paradise, they were in for a rude awakening. But instead of rushing into things, I decided to play smart. After all, this wasn't just about stopping them. It was about making sure they never messed with anyone again. I started by digging deeper into the HOA's finances. A little birdie told me that these kinds of projects don't come cheap, and sure enough, when I looked closer at their budget reports, I found something interesting. They had borrowed money from a local bank to fund the fish farm, but here's the twist. They hadn't disclosed the full cost of the project or secured proper permissions. In fact, their loan application mentioned using undeveloped community land, which, as we know, wasn't exactly true. Armed with this new information, I paid a visit to the bank manager. Let's just say he wasn't too happy about being misled. He promised to review the loan and even hinted that the HOA might face penalties if they couldn't prove ownership of the land. Score 1 for me. But then came another curveball. One evening, while reviewing documents in my study, I got a call from an anonymous source claiming to be a former HOA employee. This person revealed that the fish farm idea wasn't original. It was part of a larger scheme to attract investors and boost property values in Oakwood Heights. Apparently, the HOA president, Linda Carter, no relation, had been promising big returns to potential buyers, touting the fish farm as a selling point. This revelation sent my mind racing. Was the fish farm really just a cover for something bigger? And what other secrets was the HOA hiding? Determined to uncover the truth, I reached out to more neighbors who'd had run-ins with the HOA over the years. Each story added fuel to my fire. There were tales of forced buyouts, illegal fines, and even threats against those who dared to speak up. Meanwhile, construction on the fish farm continued at breakneck speed. The tanks were almost filled, and workers were installing nets and pumps. Watching them work so confidently made me seethe with frustration, but I reminded myself that patience was key. Every brick they laid, every pipe they installed, only strengthened my case. Once the authorities saw how far they'd gone without legal permission, there'd be no turning back for the HOA. Then, out of nowhere, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Linda herself, dressed in her usual power suit, looking like she owned the world. She strode up to my porch and demanded entry, her voice dripping with condescension. "Sarah, darling, let's settle this like adults." I raised an eyebrow. "Settle what? You stealing my land?" Linda tried to charm me, offering vague promises of compensation and even suggesting I join the HOA board. But I wasn't buying it, not for a second. Instead, I handed her a stack of papers detailing everything I'd uncovered so far. Forged documents, falsified loan applications, and unauthorized use of resources. Her smile faltered as she flipped through the pages, realizing she was in over her head. Before she left, I dropped one final bombshell. "Oh, and Linda," I said sweetly, "you might want to check your email. I've sent copies of all this to the county commissioner, the environmental agency, and every news outlet in town." Her face turned beet red, but before she could respond, I closed the door in her face. Victory tasted sweet, but I knew the battle was far from over. What I didn't realize was that the HOA still had a few tricks up their sleeve, and they weren't afraid to get dirty. The next few days were a blur of activity. After Linda's visit, I knew the HOA wasn't going to back down easily. They had too much invested in this project, both financially and reputation-wise. So I prepared myself for the long haul. Every night, I stayed up late poring over documents, searching for any loophole that could trip them up. And boy, did I find some. One evening, while reviewing old property records, I stumbled upon something strange. There was a mention of an abandoned well on my land. A well that hadn't been used in decades but still existed according to county maps. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The HOA's fish farm design included plans to tap into an underground aquifer. But guess what? That aquifer fed directly into my old well, which meant they couldn't legally use it without my permission. This discovery sent shivers down my spine. Not because I was scared, but because I realized just how deep the HOA had gone to exploit resources they didn't own. If word got out about this, it wouldn't just hurt their fish farm project. It would devastate their credibility with the entire community. But I kept quiet for now. Revenge is sweeter when served cold. Meanwhile, the HOA started playing dirty. One morning, I found flyers posted around the neighborhood, accusing me of being anti-community and selfish. "Sarah Carter is holding Oakwood Heights hostage," one flyer screamed. Another claimed I wanted to sell my land to developers for profit. At first, I laughed it off. Who would believe such nonsense? But then I noticed subtle changes in the way some neighbors looked at me. A few even avoided eye contact. It stung, but I reminded myself why I was doing this. This wasn't just about protecting my land. It was about standing up against corruption. To counter their smear campaign, I decided to go public, but not in the way they expected. Instead of arguing or defending myself, I invited local reporters to visit my property. When they arrived, I gave them a tour, showing them exactly where the HOA had built their illegal fish farm. I handed them copies of my deeds, water rights documentation, and evidence of their trespassing. By the end of the day, news outlets were buzzing with headlines like, "HOA builds fish farm on private land without permission," and "Is Oakwood Heights breaking its own rules?" But just as things seemed to be turning in my favor, another twist hit me hard. One afternoon, I received a letter from a mysterious law firm claiming they represented several Oakwood Heights residents. The letter accused me of trying to extort the HOA and demanded I stop interfering with their community improvement project. At first, I thought it was a bluff. But then I noticed something alarming. The letter included signatures from people I barely knew, including Mrs. Thompson, who always waved at me during her morning walks. How had the HOA turned so many against me? Determined to uncover the truth, I reached out to those who had signed the letter. Most refused to talk, but one brave soul, a retired teacher named Mr. Peterson, agreed to meet me discreetly. Over coffee, he revealed that the HOA had pressured him and others to sign the letter by threatening fines or worse. They said if we didn't cooperate, our property values would drop, he admitted shamefully. My heart sank. The HOA wasn't just greedy, they were manipulative bullies. Armed with this new information, I decided to take things to the next level. I contacted a prominent environmental group that specialized in exposing corporate greed and corruption. They were fascinated by my story and offered to help document everything. Together, we set up hidden cameras around the fish farm site, capturing every detail of the HOA's operations. We also interviewed former employees who confirmed that the fish farm was part of a larger scheme to attract wealthy investors, promising them exclusive access to fresh seafood grown right in the neighborhood. As weeks turned into months, tensions escalated. The HOA tried everything to intimidate me, from sending lawyers to filing baseless complaints with the authorities. But nothing fazed me. I knew I had the upper hand, thanks to my meticulous preparation and growing support network. Even some Oakwood Heights residents began speaking out against the HOA, sharing their own stories of mistreatment and unfair practices. And then came the final twist, one that neither the HOA nor I saw coming. During one of my routine inspections of the fish farm, I noticed something odd. Hidden among the tanks and pipes was a small device labeled Water Quality Monitor. Curious, I investigated further and discovered it was actually a surveillance tool planted by none other than the HOA president, Linda Carter. She'd been spying on me all along. Couldn't believe it. Not only had they trespassed on my land, stolen my resources, and manipulated the community, they'd also invaded my privacy. This was the nail in their coffin. I immediately reported the discovery to the police and shared the evidence with the media. Within hours, the story went viral. Headlines screamed about the corrupt HOA leader who thought she was above the law. By the time the HOA realized I wasn't backing down, they'd already dug themselves into a deep hole, both literally and figuratively. Their fish farm project was nearing completion, but so was my plan to expose them for the frauds they were. Every day brought new revelations, each one more shocking than the last. One morning, as I reviewed the footage from our hidden cameras, I noticed something peculiar. There was a man in a black hoodie who didn't look like any of the regular workers. He seemed nervous, glancing around constantly before disappearing into one of the storage sheds near the fish tanks. My curiosity piqued, and I decided to investigate further. That evening, I snuck onto my own property, if you can call it sneaking when it's your land, and peeked inside the shed. What I found nearly made me drop my flashlight. Stacks of documents labeled confidential sat on a rickety table. At first glance, they looked harmless. Project plans, financial statements, supply lists. But as I flipped through them, I discovered something chilling. The HOA wasn't just building a fish farm. They were using the aquifer beneath my land to power an entire underground network of water filtration systems. These systems weren't just for the fish farm. They extended into other parts of Oakwood Heights, supplying water to homes that hadn't paid their dues or followed HOA rules. In short, the HOA had created its own private water empire, all while violating laws and exploiting resources. Couldn't believe it. This wasn't just about stealing my land, it was about controlling the community. But how could they get away with something this big? And why hadn't anyone noticed until now? Determined to dig deeper, I called Mr. Peterson again, the retired teacher who had helped me earlier. When I showed him the documents, his eyes widened. "Sarah," he whispered, "this is bigger than we thought. The HOA's been doing this for years. They've targeted specific families, cutting off their water supply if they dared to complain or refuse bribes." This revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. It explained everything: the Wilson's hush money deal, the sudden drop in complaints against the HOA, even Linda's smug confidence during our meetings. She knew exactly what she was doing because she believed no one would dare challenge her. Well, she picked the wrong person this time. Armed with this explosive information, I reached out to the environmental group once more. They were thrilled by the discovery and promised to help me blow the lid off the HOA's illegal operations. Together, we drafted a press release detailing every aspect of their scheme, from trespassing on private property to illegally tapping into protected aquifers. We also included testimonials from affected residents, painting a clear picture of the HOA's tyranny. But just as we were about to go public, another twist threw me off balance. One evening, I received a visit from Ryan, the neighbor who had warned me about the HOA's past misdeeds. His expression was grim. "Sarah," he said, "you need to see this. He handed me a USB drive containing emails between Linda Carter and a powerful real estate developer named Marcus Lane. As I scrolled through the messages, my jaw dropped. The emails revealed that the fish farm project was part of a larger development plan to transform Oakwood Heights into a luxury gated community. And guess who stood to benefit most? Marcus Lane, whose company owned half the properties in town. Suddenly, the pieces fell into place. The HOA wasn't acting alone. They were working hand in hand with Marcus Lane to consolidate power and wealth. The fish farm was merely a stepping stone toward something far more sinister. If they succeeded, Oakwood Heights wouldn't be a neighborhood anymore. It would become a playground for the rich, leaving longtime residents high and dry. I knew I couldn't take this lightly. With renewed determination, I expanded my investigation, reaching out to local journalists, government officials, and even state regulators. Slowly but surely, a coalition formed around me. A group of people united by their desire to bring justice to Oakwood Heights. Some donated legal advice, others provided resources, and a few brave souls shared their stories of mistreatment at the hands of the HOA. As the days passed, the pressure mounted. The HOA tried everything to silence me, threatening lawsuits, spreading rumors, even attempting to bribe me. But none of it worked. By now, I had too much evidence, too many allies, and too much resolve. They might have underestimated me once, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. And then came the final twist. One that changed everything. The next morning, I woke up to a knock on my door. It wasn't Linda this time. It was Ryan, the neighbor who had warned me about the HOA's past misdeeds. He looked pale and anxious, clutching a stack of papers in his hands. "Sarah," he whispered urgently, "you need to see this." He handed me the documents, which turned out to be internal emails between Linda Carter and Marcus Lane, the real estate developer tied to the luxury community project. As I read through them, my blood ran cold. The emails revealed that the fish farm wasn't just a way to control water. It was also a cover for something far more sinister. Beneath the tanks and filtration systems, they were secretly constructing tunnels that connected directly to Oakwood Heights sewer lines. These tunnels weren't meant for waste management. They were designed to smuggle materials and people into the neighborhood without detection. At first, I thought it was some kind of joke. Why would anyone go to such lengths? But as I dug deeper, the truth became clear. Marcus Lane planned to use these tunnels to bring in undocumented workers at night, bypassing immigration laws and exploiting their labor to build his luxury homes faster and cheaper. And the HOA? They were complicit, taking bribes in exchange for turning a blind eye. I couldn't believe what I was reading. This wasn't just corruption, it was criminal activity on a massive scale. If word got out, it wouldn't just ruin the HOA or Marcus Lane. It could spark investigations across the entire county. But how could I prove it? Evidence like this didn't come cheap, and exposing it wouldn't be easy. Still, I knew I had to act fast. That evening, I called an old friend of mine, Alex, a journalist with a knack for uncovering scandals. After hearing my story, she was all in. Together, we devised a plan to infiltrate the construction site under the guise of being potential investors. Alex dressed up in her finest suit, while I wore jeans and a leather jacket to blend in. We arrived at the fish farm late one afternoon, posing as eager buyers interested in the exclusive opportunities offered by Oakwood Heights. To our surprise, Linda herself greeted us. She seemed overly friendly, showing off the tanks and explaining how the aquifer provided fresh water year-round. But when we asked questions about the underground systems, her demeanor shifted. She grew nervous, glancing around before steering us away from certain areas. That only confirmed my suspicions. There was definitely more going on beneath the surface. Later that night, Alex and I snuck back onto the property armed with cameras and flashlights. Using the hidden tunnels mentioned in the emails, we descended into the dark, damp underworld beneath the fish farm. What we found there left me speechless. Stacks of building materials, crates marked with foreign labels, and even sleeping quarters set up for workers. It was every bit as bad as the emails suggested. But just as we were gathering evidence, disaster struck. One of the workers spotted us and raised the alarm. Within minutes, security guards swarmed the area, forcing us to flee. We barely made it out alive, but not before capturing crucial footage of the operation. Back at home, I spent hours editing the video, making sure every detail was crystal clear. Before dawn broke, I sent the footage to Alex, who promised to publish it immediately. By noon, the story hit every major news outlet in the state. Headlines screamed about the HOA's involvement in illegal activities, and social media erupted with outrage. Residents of Oakwood Heights were furious, not just at the HOA, but at Marcus Lane and his unethical practices. Protests erupted outside the fish farm, demanding answers and accountability. Linda tried to deny everything, holding press conferences where she blamed outside agitators for spreading lies. But the evidence was too strong. County officials launched an investigation, freezing the HOA's assets and shutting down the fish farm indefinitely. Meanwhile, Marcus Lane disappeared, leaving behind half-finished projects and angry investors. As chaos unfolded, I received another unexpected twist. A lawyer representing several Oakwood Heights residents contacted me, asking if I'd join their class action lawsuit against the HOA and Marcus Lane. At first, I hesitated. Lawsuits were messy and time-consuming, but then I remembered all the families who had suffered because of the HOA's greed. How could I say no? The next morning, I woke up to a knock on my door. It was Ryan again, this time holding another envelope filled with documents. "Sarah," he said breathlessly, "you're not going to believe this." Inside the envelope were photos and emails showing that Marcus Lane wasn't just smuggling workers through the tunnels. He was also bribing key members of the HOA board, including Linda Carter herself. In exchange for their silence, they received hefty bonuses and shares in his upcoming luxury development projects. My heart raced as I read through the evidence. This wasn't just about stopping the fish farm or exposing the tunnels. It was now about dismantling an entire criminal network operating right under everyone's noses. But how could I prove it without putting myself at risk? If Marcus Lane found out I had these documents, there was no telling what he might do. I decided to take a bold step. That evening, I contacted Alex once more. She listened intently as I explained everything: the bribes, the illegal activities, and the HOA's role in covering it all up. "This is huge, Sarah," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "But we need to be careful. If Marcus Lane gets wind of this, he'll crush us." We spent the next few days planning meticulously. Alex suggested we leak parts of the evidence anonymously to smaller news outlets first, building momentum before hitting the major ones. Meanwhile, I reached out to the county prosecutor's office, offering them a deal: full cooperation in exchange for protection. They agreed, recognizing the gravity of the situation. As the investigation unfolded, new twists kept emerging. One day, while reviewing old property records, I discovered something shocking. Years ago, Marcus Lane had secretly purchased several plots of land surrounding Oakwood Heights, including one adjacent to mine. His goal? To create a buffer zone around his developments, ensuring no one could interfere with his plans. And who had helped him secure those deals? None other than Linda Carter, using forged documents and fake signatures. With each revelation, the public's outrage grew louder. Protesters gathered outside the HOA offices, demanding answers. Some even blocked access to the fish farm site, halting construction entirely. The pressure on Linda and her team became unbearable. One by one, the HOA board members started cracking. A few resigned outright, while others began leaking information to the press in hopes of reducing their sentences. But just when I thought things couldn't get any crazier, another bombshell dropped. During a routine inspection of the fish farm, investigators uncovered hidden compartments beneath the tanks. Inside, they found stacks of cash, passports, and even weapons. It turned out Marcus Lane wasn't just smuggling workers. He was running a full-blown underground operation right under our noses. The media frenzy that followed was unprecedented. Headlines screamed about the HOA mafia and the luxury developers' dirty secrets. Residents of Oakwood Heights demanded immediate action, calling for the dissolution of the HOA altogether. County officials responded swiftly, freezing all HOA assets and launching a thorough audit of their finances. Linda Carter, once so confident and smug, was now a shadow of her former self. She tried to negotiate a plea deal, claiming she'd been coerced into working with Marcus Lane. But the prosecutor wasn't buying it, not after uncovering emails where she bragged about her cut of the profits. By the end of the week, both Linda and Marcus were under arrest, facing charges ranging from fraud to human trafficking. And yet, despite the victories, I knew the fight wasn't over. Marcus Lane still had powerful allies, and the HOA's influence ran deep within the community. Some residents remained loyal to Linda, refusing to believe the evidence against her. Others simply didn't care, too caught up in their own lives to worry about corruption. But for every skeptic, there were 10 people ready to stand with me. Neighbors who had suffered under the HOA's tyranny and finally saw hope for change. As the dust settled, I reflected on everything that had happened. What started as a simple dispute over property rights had spiraled into something far bigger. A battle against greed, manipulation, and abuse of power. And though the road ahead would be long, I felt a sense of pride knowing I'd stood up for what was right. By the time summer rolled around, Oakwood Heights was a completely different place. The HOA crumbled under the weight of its own corruption, and Linda Carter, once the untouchable queen of the neighborhood, was now just another disgraced figure in the news headlines. But while justice had been served for some, others still bore the scars of years spent living under her rule. One evening, as I sat on my porch sipping coffee, I noticed something unusual. A car pulled up outside my house, and out stepped Ryan, the neighbor who had warned me about the HOA's past misdeeds. He looked uneasy, glancing around before walking up to my door. "Sarah," he said hesitantly, "there's one more thing you should know." I raised an eyebrow. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure if I could handle any more surprises. But Ryan continued, explaining how the HOA hadn't acted alone all these years. There were other powerful figures in the county who had turned a blind eye, or even helped facilitate their schemes, in exchange for favors. One name kept coming up: Councilman Jameson, a man known for his smooth speeches and polished appearance. According to Ryan, Jameson had received generous donations from Marcus Lane during election campaigns. In return, he had ensured no questions were asked about the HOA's activities. At first, I didn't believe it. How could someone in such a high position be involved? But then Ryan handed me a folder filled with documents, emails, meeting minutes, and financial records showing transfers between Marcus Lane's company and Jameson's campaign fund. It was enough to make anyone's stomach churn. Determined to expose this final layer of corruption, I called Alex once again. She listened intently, her voice tinged with both shock and excitement. "This changes everything," she said. Together, we devised a plan to leak the information gradually, building public pressure until there was no denying the truth. We also reached out to investigative journalists and watchdog groups who specialized in uncovering political scandals. As the evidence came to light, the backlash against Councilman Jameson was swift and brutal. Protesters gathered outside City Hall, demanding his resignation. Media outlets grilled him in interviews, forcing him to fumble through half-truths and evasive answers. By the end of the week, Jameson announced he would step down pending an investigation into his ties with Marcus Lane and the HOA. But just when I thought the story was over, another twist hit me like a freight train. One night, I received an anonymous package containing a USB drive labeled simply, "The Final Piece." Curious and slightly wary, I plugged it into my computer. What I found left me speechless. The drive contained video footage from inside the HOA offices, captured by someone working undercover. In the videos, Linda Carter and several board members discussed plans to silence anyone who dared challenge them. They talked about forging documents, bribing officials, and even threatening legal action against whistleblowers. Worst of all, they mentioned a list of targets, people they planned to discredit or ruin financially if necessary. And at the top of that list, my name. My heart sank as I realized how close I had come to being destroyed. If not for my determination and the support of allies like Ryan and Alex, I might have ended up like so many others, broken, silenced, forgotten. But instead, I chose to fight back. With the help of the environmental group and local authorities, I handed over the evidence to law enforcement. Within days, warrants were issued for the arrest of everyone implicated in the conspiracy, including former HOA members and their accomplices. As the dust settled, Oakwood Heights began to heal. Residents who had suffered in silence finally spoke out, sharing stories of mistreatment and abuse. Some formed committees to ensure accountability moving forward, while others worked to rebuild trust within the community. Even the Wilsons, the elderly couple Marcus Lane had bullied into accepting hush money, found the courage to speak publicly about their ordeal. Their bravery inspired others to come forward, exposing additional easement scams and illegal practices that had gone unnoticed for years. And yet, despite the victories, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about Oakwood Heights. It was about systems of power everywhere. Greedy developers, corrupt politicians, and oppressive organizations existed in every corner of the world, preying on those too afraid or powerless to stand up. But what happened here proved one thing. When people unite, even the most entrenched injustices can be defeated. In the end, I installed a simple plaque near the edge of my property where the fish farm once stood. It read, "Private property, water rights enforced." Underneath, in smaller letters, I added, "Never underestimate the power of knowledge and the strength of those willing to fight for what's right." Lesson of the story. Sometimes, standing up for yourself means fighting battles far bigger than you ever imagined. But with courage, strategy, and the support of others, even the most overwhelming odds can be overcome. Justice may take time, but it always finds a way.